All right. Hello, is this working? Can you hear me? Welcome. Got 7 people so far. We're going to give it about 5 minutes for people to come in. Hello, Totoro. All right. Golf Wolf. Medicine Horse. Hello. I like all of your names. All right. We are about ready to go. 14 people. Izzy, Pat, what is up? How are you? Thanks for coming. Hi to Lars and Sal. 7:05 is going to be the real start time. For now, I just wanted to make sure audio and everything is working and that people are able to log on. Looks like that's working. Somebody please tell me if I'm just speaking into the void with no working microphone. That would be bad. I'm doing all right, Golf Wolf. How are you? Good. Everyone can hear me. Everyone can hear me. Everything is working. Good stuff. All right. 4 more minutes before we start. I'm glad to see the chat is working. Feel free to say hi if you're here. Tell me your real name if you like, where you're from, etc. Audio's working. This is good. Golf Wolf is good. Before we really get started, just sort of a, I don't know, explanation of how this is going to go. I think my camera's working all right as well. The noise is a little bad on my end because of the garbage truck outside, if you want to see. It's a little bit noisy to me. I see that Liz Ganaka is here. Liz, look at this. Look at this. What's going on? I need to swing by. Alec is here. Hello from the Netherlands. Hi, Lars. The video won't load. I don't know how to help you, Alexa. I don't know what to do for that one. I'm not good with the IT stuff on this. 2 a.m. Lars, I appreciate you. Oh, man. All right, couple more minutes. So I got thrown off by the loud garbage truck. But in terms of how this is going to go, if you weren't here for the last one, essentially, I'm going to ramble and I'm going to respond to your comments. I have an outline of things that I want to talk about, but I also want to talk about what you want to talk about in regards to Yoko Ogawa's The Memory Police. So this is the topic of tonight's conversation. There's no set end time. The last one went about an hour. I'm not sure if this one will go as long. The last one had like 20 characters that each had their own chapters to talk about. This is a much smaller book in terms of the scope of it. It only takes place on one island instead of 2 different continents across hundreds of years. So not sure if it'll take up the same amount of time to discuss, but I've got plenty to talk about. I hope some of you read the book and have some things you want to talk about as well. Feel free to throw stuff that you want to talk about into the chat at any point. I think I'm pretty good at focusing on one idea at a time and then checking the chat. So don't worry about like interrupting me or anything. That won't be a problem. No set end time. There will be spoilers, I think, from the start. Last time I saved any conversation about the end of the book until the end of the discussion, but I think that's harder to do with this book. So I'll give a pretty full summary at the beginning so that people who haven't finished it can catch up. Yeah, if you're like halfway through it or something, I'm sorry, but it's hard to discuss without talking about the end. So 7:04, give it 1 more minute to go over these. Hello from England, from Totoro, 1 a.m. Lars suggests refreshing the page if you can't see it, Alexa. All right. 7:05. We got 15 people and a good 5 or 6 people chatting, so this is going to work out well. Liz, are you outside? Waving at my building. That's very nice. All right, 7:05. Let's talk about the memory police. We'll start with, again, a summary. Pretty full summary again for those who aren't caught up or haven't read. Again, throw stuff in the chat. Actually, even while I'm going over the summary, feel free to put in whatever you want to talk about, like soon. If you read the book and there's something you're anxious to discuss, feel free to put that in the chat as I'm going through the summary, and then that'll be the first thing I see after I'm done talking about this. So, the memory police takes place on an island where things disappear. And the process of how they disappear is really confusing early on, because it's not like things just sort of magically disappear out of your hands, but the memory of things disappears and the objects themselves are like kind of forcibly destroyed. So essentially the citizens who live on this island just wake up in the morning, and every once in a while, it's not every day, sometimes it's really frequent, sometimes it's not very frequent, and they kind of forget that these things even happen, but they'll wake up in the morning and they'll just be able to sense that something is gone that day. And the objects, again, themselves remain, but it's just understood that they're going to be gone from everyone's memories soon, and they need to be destroyed, either from putting these objects in the river or incinerating them. It depends on what they need to get rid of. So, for example, like when perfume is the object that they wake up and need to destroy, they pour that into the river. Same with when roses disappear, they just sort of fall from the trees, and the river overflows with rose petals as it flows by, and everyone sort of gets rid of any roses or flowers that they had in their house. So the objects themselves are destroyed. You must destroy them, and the memories follow. People just don't remember the objects themselves anymore. So some people are able to, or some people like sneakily sort of hold on to some of these objects, but nobody else would really recognize it. Like if it's a bottle of perfume, somebody could look at it and smell it and notice that it has a scent, but they wouldn't recognize what it's for, or that it's a good or pleasant smell. It would just be some object that they don't recognize or have any recollection of. So this doesn't necessarily affect everybody. There are a handful of people on the island who are able to retain their memories and can recognize these objects after they sort of magically are supposed to be disappeared. And that is, those people become outlaws. It becomes sort of obvious that they are able to, piece together that things are missing when other people aren't. So the memory police is the name of the book, and sort of the paramilitary force that enforces the forgetting of these objects. They sweep through neighborhoods, destroy objects, interrogate citizens. They are, again, sort of the only sort of police force in town, and it's because it seems to be the only crime is remembering things you're not supposed to, or holding on to mementos or objects that are supposed to be forgotten or are forgotten by everybody else. There are only 3 main characters in this book. The first is the narrator. She doesn't have a name, nameless narrator. She's a novelist. She lives alone in the house that belonged to her parents. Her father passed away. Her mother, who was one of the people who could remember objects and stored some in a cupboard, she was taken by the memory police and never came back. So the daughter, the main character, the novelist, lives by herself in her parents' old house. The secondary character, I'd say, is an old man who is just referred to as the old man. So again, a character without a name. He's a family friend who was close with the narrator, and he was a ferryman. He was in charge of driving the ferry to different islands, but he is retired now, both because he's old, the old man, but also because ferries and boats are objects that have been disappeared from people's memories, and many of them have been destroyed. He still lives on his ferry, but to him it's just an object that is his home, it's difficult to piece together what its purpose was for the people who see the fairy. The last character, the third sort of main character, is the main character's, the narrator's editor. So she's a novelist, he's her editor, and he, we discover about, I think, halfway through the book, is one of the people who is able to retain his memories. He remembers objects and things and all the stuff that everybody else is supposed to forget. The story really starts to develop after he reveals that. So his name is R. I forgot to say that. That character's name is just the letter R. So we've got the nameless narrator, the old man, and R. And the story develops then when R reveals to the main character that he is one of the people who still has memories. And she insists on helping him in any way that she can. And what she comes up with is to hide him in a small sort of hidden room under her floorboards to protect him from the memory police. So in terms of the plot and what happens from there, there really isn't a whole lot of plot to speak of, in terms of that there isn't really any connecting thread. There's not a lot of cause and effect that runs throughout the book. It's just a constant forgetting. Chapter after chapter, a new object will be forgotten, and then the implications of that sort of ring throughout the island. There are a few close calls with the memory police. There's once when the old man is taken by them for questioning because a group of people who still had their memories were able to escape on a boat. And so the memory police called in everybody that knew anything about boats at any time and questions them about, if they were involved in helping these people escape. There's another time that the memory police sort of come through the narrator's house as they're sweeping her neighborhood and come pretty close to finding the room where R is hiding. And the last sort of brush up with them is when the narrator and the old man just miss having their bags searched at a train station, and the bags contained several sculptures that the narrator's mother created. She was an artist, a sculptor, and she hid lots of objects within her sculptures, the objects that were supposed to be forgotten. And so one time they're nearly caught at a train station as they're sort of smuggling those from one place where she used to work back to the house where the narrator lives. So other than that, in terms of like big events that happen, the biggest is I'd say the one that changes the character the most. I haven't really gotten into the types of objects aside from perfume and roses that disappear, but at some point novels disappear. She wakes up one morning and realizes that novels are the next thing to go. And as a novelist, this obviously affects her. It leads to a big book burning throughout the island. The library is set on fire, and novels are just no more. And how she reacts to that is the last 100 or so pages of the book. A little bit later, while she's visiting with the old man on his ferry, there's an earthquake that damages the island, and something crashes on top of the old man. The narrator pulls him out just in time to escape the tsunami that follows and destroys the ferry and several other buildings around there. Shortly after that, the old man passes away from his injury that he sustained on the boat. And very near the end, in the most sort of surreal twist of this already magical sort of book, she starts losing the memories of body parts. And that's what happens to the whole island. They wake up one morning and none of them can recognize this thing that's attached to their hip that is their left leg. It's just sort of, they don't recognize it. They don't know what it is. She's very confused when she wakes up because there's something attached to her hip and it's her own leg. A little bit later, she loses her right arm. And then at the end of the book, they lose their bodies. They don't have any concept of their bodies. They just think that it's a voice and thoughts and air. And at the very, very end, R, who had been hiding in the narrator's house in that little room for a good 150 pages or so, he takes her sort of final manuscript and he I'm not sure if he brings it with him, but he sort of emerges from his hidden room after the entire island is left without any memory or knowledge of their own bodies and selves, and then they all just sort of die that way. So that's the plot or the story. There's a lot to talk about. I'm gonna check the messages over here. Okay, cool. All right. Alex says, "What did you think about the setting? I didn't get to finish, but the island gave me." Yes, so the isolation of the island was definitely a huge part of it. And so one weird thing about the things that disappear is that you can't tell necessarily if they're intentional or not. They're definitely essential in a lot of ways, but whether or not there's any sort of force or if the memory police themselves are deciding on what disappears. I mean, the boats are the biggest one. The boats and ferries, um, like being unable to move to any other island definitely makes this sort of scary environment, right? They're absolutely isolated. They can't get off the island at all. The people that do escape, nobody knows if they made it. I think there was one report that so many people crowded onto this boat that it probably couldn't have gotten very far before it just sort of disappeared forever. But they are stuck, and the memory police are out to get them at every turn. So yeah, the isolation was definitely sort of hanging over the entire environment of the book. Um, Lars, what did you think of the speechless typist story, and how do you think it ties in with the story besides the main character writing it? Obviously, so that's a good question, and something that I didn't take enough notes on, but is definitely worth noting. Is a lot of the chapters start off with a novel that the main character is writing, and that's the type of literary device that normally, when I first see it, it always irritates me, and then it always ends up winning me over because it's it's hard enough to sort of just sit down and pick up a book and read these days with the many distractions that we all have. But to then read a book that the character in the book is writing, to read a story within a story, it always annoys me at the beginning because I'm like, I don't care, like with this inception level of caring about characters who are writing other characters. Like I don't have the mental sort of depth to get into that. But I really, it always wins over. This and 1004 is another novel I read fairly recently that did a similar thing where I ended up being really invested in the character's character. But in this, in terms of how it incorporated with the story, well, the every character that the novelist writes is a character who has lost something. I think I do have that written down somewhere. A piano tuner whose lover has gone missing, a ballerina who lost a leg, a boy whose chromosomes are being destroyed by disease, and then finally the typist who loses her voice and only can communicate through typing, and then the typewriter breaks and she loses that as well, and then becomes sort of a captive in her typing teacher's lighthouse attic. And in terms of what I thought about that, and in terms of what that meant for sort of the main character who was writing the book, a lot of it seemed to be how she was processing her own situation in terms of everything in her environment disappearing around her. She clearly saw herself in the characters that she was writing about in terms of how they are processing what they're losing. And it especially took on a significance when novels are the thing that disappears, because it's both her work, but it's also how she processes the world around her. It's how she copes. It's a coping mechanism for living in this type of terrifying environment. And so that was one thing that I liked about a lot of the objects that disappeared as well. Was, I mean, think of both the career ramifications, but also what those objects represent. At one point, she said that she's sort of relieved that her father passed away before birds were the objects or animals that disappeared, and it's because he was an ornithologist. And if he had been an old man and birds disappeared and he had no memory of birds and he had to burn all of his bird books and all the things he had written on birds, then what is the effect of that on people? And as it sort of rips through the community. Hats at some point go away, and then there's, I mean, clearly no more hat makers. So as each sort of item disappears through the island, the personal ramifications, both in terms of people's passions and what they do for a living, but then again, what those things represent, like perfume and roses and stuff. When perfume and roses are gone, then so is romance, metaphorically speaking. And so a lot of what those objects are and represent clearly plays a big part in this. And so when novels go away, then you know we really empathize with her in that moment for sure. All right, scrolling back up because I think I missed some comments. Liz, I'm going back to an old one of yours. You said you couldn't quite understand how he was able to live on the ferry and wasn't in trouble for not destroying it. Agreed. Even as I was writing the notes out, I was like, wait a second. But and that's the weird sort of amorphous part of this, is that it's impossible to know how some of these objects exist, how they're not destroyed, how they're able to recognize it, because they still called it the fairy a lot of the time. So shouldn't they not know? But where those lines are blurred is one of the things that I think is meant to deliberately make it confusing, for the characters themselves, in terms of this constant state of fear and confusion that they're in. Like, in that gray area is difficult. Even the fact that she's able to finish writing her manuscript after she's forgotten what a novel is. When she finishes that book, there's a sense of hope there that she's getting better. Novels have gone away, and she finished writing a novel when, earlier in the book, it made it seem like she'd, forgotten even what creative writing was as a whole. She didn't understand that people could make sentences about things that didn't exist. And so, I don't really have a good understanding necessarily of how the fairy stayed around, or how they even knew what it was. The old man and the narrator both knew what it was, but lost their memories. Yeah, that was strange. The act of sailing is forgotten. That's why there are still a few boats, and why some people were able to escape after modifying a small boat. Okay, so the concept itself was gone. What you thought of the speechless typist story? I got sucked into it. I enjoyed it. Isabel, I struggled with not having any context for the memory police. Maybe that was the point, but I definitely wanted some historical type background. Absolutely. There was, like, the closest thing would be like the Gestapo, or SS. I know I read a couple articles today about Yoko Ogawa, and she was like pretty much obsessed with Anne Frank when she was a kid. She read the book several times and has posted notes in every single page. And or I should say, and frankly, the author and her diary. And so that definitely was part of it, especially in terms of how R was hidden in the floorboards, hidden in the narrator's house. So, but yeah, but that is a confusing thing as well, because even though there's definitely some Nazi parallels there, um, it's not as overtly political as you think it's going to be in terms of fascism. I mean, it was written in 1994, even though it seems like it would have been written recently. I think the translator said that when he chose that of her books to translate, it was only like 5 years ago or so, and I think that was because of sort of a sense of rising fascism throughout the world. But again, for a book written in 1994, the political undertones are kind of just that, and there's no overt sort of overcoming of that, or even trying to understand the memory police, which was one thing that was interesting and frustrating. I actually have a whole, like, several bullets on a section in my outline that's like things that I wanted to be different, but things that I shouldn't have wanted to be different. Like, I appreciated they were things that frustrated me in the book, but then upon thinking about them further, I realized that the book should not have gone the way that I wanted. It was deliberately supposed to be like this on purpose. I'll get to that in a little bit. Liz liked having no context. Yeah, early on. I wanted it to be very concrete in terms of how are these things disappearing? Why are they disappearing? Who's choosing them? What's making them disappear? But then again, that's another sort of thing that's like not the point. It's just how it is. That's the environment. That's the magical realism sort of environment that we're put in. Lars, novelist and the speechless typist started out as the same person in my mind. They're both, yes, struggling with loss, reflection, dealing with it. Completely agree. Liz, another good point in terms of it being an easy read. You didn't need to know any background and just sort of learned as you got through. Yes, Izzy agrees with that as well. Completely, because any one of those sort of questions, if you keep pulling at it, could have been an entire another novel's worth. Like if one of them knew a character who was in the memory police, like, and they were humanized a bit instead of just being this dreaded force throughout the island, then there'd be more to examine there, and that's sort of something that just needs to stay inexplicable, both for the reader to get a sense of the character's fear of everything, but also because, again, if you start pulling at that, then that can just go on forever. Lars says the end during the shift in the love interest. I saw similarities between the novelist and him. They're both keeping people locked up, even though it is for widely different reasons. Yeah, so one thing that I didn't mention is the typist and her typing teacher, the characters within the book that is being written by another character, are lovers at one point, and then it turns out that the typing teacher is an abusive, manipulative psychopath. It seems who continues to trap women in the attic because he says that each typewriter and the that room is scattered and littered with mountains of typewriters. He says each one of those is somebody's voice who he has trapped within the typewriter and then made the typewriter stop working. And so each one represents a person that he has sort of seemingly killed or locked in his attic. And so that definitely has, is very different from her hiding or sort of trapping her editor R in her floorboards. So yeah, and she also has a relationship with him R, and he had to leave his wife and newborn baby because having somebody who has those memories puts the whole family at risk. And so he sort of ran away, but then he and the narrator begin a relationship because he's been hiding there forever. And it seems like there's, even though they discuss, oh, when you'll come out, when you get out of this, I mean, there's no reason for them to think that there will be anything that turns this around. So they're pretty much resigned to him just living there forever. Let's see. Oh, so in terms of the relationships, I mean, the typing teacher and the typist versus R and the narrator was, I don't know, I don't want to make too many sort of logistical jumps in narrative, but it would be more like um, the typing student's relationship with a typing instructor is more like the narrator's relationship with life and her environment as a whole, and not with R, because the thing that keeps taking stuff from the typing student is the typing teacher, and the thing that through which the narrator loses everything is just the world around her. It's just the environment constantly taking and taking and taking. So that's kind of how I read that, I guess, Lars. Izzy, like fleshing out worlds for the characters, so missing that. Agreed. It was so cool. They just got to meet the character where they were at and accept the parameters of the world. Completely agree. It was weird for as much time as you spend with a narrator, both how little I guess you know about her in terms of her history. It's just that she always wanted to be a writer and then became one until novelists go away. But there is something about certainly other characters and not even knowing their names that feels a bit impersonal, even though at some points you feel like you know them intimately. Lars, no worries about rambling. Later on, both the typist and the novelist accept that they are fighting an uphill battle and just give in and accept their fate. Yeah, that is the acceptance of fate is such a like is such a bummer in this book in terms of how that happens. I've got a section where I'm going to talk about that as well. Hang on, I'm going to read all your comments quickly. No worries about rambling, Lars. First thought was a similarity to Germany in the 40s, internal Germany, where things are getting destroyed, taken from people. Absolutely. Later, it seems to be more like current society where people are losing themselves and each other. I like that a lot. I think I'll start. I think I'll talk about that a little bit. Alec, feel free to jump in terms of how people lose each other and pieces of themselves. Such a Japanese way to storytelling, leaving things unexplained and just letting the reader imagining it for themselves. One reason why I love Japanese film so much, I think Haruki Murakami as well, in terms of Japanese authors that I've read. I've read a couple of his novels where I just can't piece together what's happening. More whys and hows in the novel within the novel from Liz. Agreed. Each one is more confusing than the one that we left. Completely agree in terms of how the typing teacher like takes voices and puts them in typewriters and then destroys typewriters and just makes these women disappear. Um, Agreed. I'm gonna jump over to my notes really quick. Yeah, most of the things I want to talk about are things that I wanted to happen that didn't happen, but also why it was important that those things didn't happen. But in terms of other stuff, I talked about all these livelihoods. The in terms especially of parallels to today, the moneyed aspect of the memory police. They are well outfitted. They are, wearing snow boots and heavy jackets where other people have nothing, and they offer that professor who flees. For those of you who read the book, there's a professor and a family who run away. Memory police offer him triple his salary, make special provisions for taxes and insurance and car and stuff. They have the money and therefore the power, and that was reminiscent, especially of some protests that I've seen recently with local police departments outfitted with riot gear and weaponry like you wouldn't believe, up against people who are not in a comparable position. So just in terms of how the sort of oppressive force has the money and the power behind them was something that was equally scary in the book. The memory police could have just ripped through a neighborhood and caused all kinds of damage and faced no repercussions themselves. And that was reminiscent of today's world for sure. We talked about that a little bit. Yeah. So some of the other things that were destroyed that had big impacts. So, I mean, if you lose birds and boats, then you forget a sense of anywhere that isn't the island. You don't think of escape in terms of logistically through sailing, or in terms of birds in the sky, thinking that they might be going somewhere else that isn't the island. Um, they lose photographs at one point, so the physical memories of families and friends and times and places. Fruits are destroyed, so forget health or forget recipes that require fruits, and therefore culture of the history of your family. If you can't make your grandmother's favorite recipe anymore because the fruit that is required in it has been disappeared off the island, then these people are constantly unaware of even they forget the forgetting. They forget that they're missing these things, and it's just further emptying these people down to eventually nothing. The one that was especially interesting in terms of how it affected everybody was when the calendars were destroyed, and it seemed to pause time itself. They were just in a perpetual winter. I don't think we ever saw springtime after that point, after the calendars were destroyed. And it seems to have a very real effect in that they were sort of paused in this winter. The Liz, no, Liz, don't worry. Come on, too political. Not at all. Yeah, abolishment of the memory police would benefit everyone on the island. Absolutely. Yes, the premise of the story is so much more scary. Absolutely. That was, I'm going to get again to the thing that I really wanted in the story that is like a super American way to perceive this, and something that definitely distinguishes the type of fiction that I'm used to from Japanese fiction. But yes, agreed. So, in terms of how they accepted everything and were so used to things going away. So certainly when the book started picking up, I think when novels went away, but then when I mean, this is towards the end, but when their left legs disappeared and she woke up and she only figured it out because she decided she had to get dressed to figure out what was on her leg so that she could go outside and talk to her neighbors about it. She sees her pants, she pulls on the right leg, and then she's looking at the left leg of her pants and looks at the thing attached to her hip, and that's only when she realizes, oh right, this thing looks like it would fit in there, and so this must be a left leg, and that's and that's how I'll put these pants on. I mean, it's crazy, and they don't get angry about it. They all meet outside, they hobble over to each other and say, what are we going to do? And they think, hey, we've lost other stuff, this is just the next thing that we're losing, and it's literally a piece of themselves. It's their leg. Um, so again, that's one of the scary things in terms of, if as things are taken away, at what point do you draw the line? And it's scary to think that there isn't one, that a part of your body can literally be taken away, and you just think, hey, that's just how things go around here. It's a really terrifying prospect. um the ending, I can talk about a little bit. I'm going to skip through some of these things. In general, I like stories that have some hope. And there isn't a whole lot here aside from R climbing out of his secret room at the end. When he emerges, we assume that the memory police are almost entirely gone, just because with everybody not having left legs and then right arms and then other parts of their body for however long that stretch took, it's kind of unclear in terms of how quickly that process happened. But with people unaware of their bodies, with no memory of having bodies, then the memory at some point become unnecessary. And so the hope is that when R climbs out, there's no memory police around, either on the island at all, or that he would be able to gather enough people like him. Um, is the hope. The mother leaves behind some art. We also have that the narrator finished her novel, and that's an artist's possession, so that maybe that can live beyond her. Another small piece of or glimmer of hope, but again, we don't know if anyone else survived, either to escape with him or to rebuild. All right, I'm going to check some notes again. Let's see. None of the characters. So Lars comments. What did you think of none of the characters having a name? At first, it was a choice to emphasize forgetting, but after completing the book, I'm not sure if it was deliberate choice or just the writer's style. Yeah. I'm unsure too. I've read a couple different books. Different cultures handle writing different ways as well. Like I've read like German books or old English sort of romantic period novels where they just have, Mr. S and then a dash. And I forget the purpose of that. I'm not sure if this is the last Murakami book I read was a while ago, and so I'm not sure if this is sort of a distinct sort of Japanese thing, or if it's just to this character, or if it's thematic in terms of people losing pieces of themselves and not even having a concrete thing like a name to hold on to. I'm not entirely sure, especially why they would give, like, the professor has a name in Inui, I believe. Why would that sort of minor character have a name and none of these major characters? I don't entirely know. I don't have a great answer for that. Yes, the fright, as Liz says, the fright in everyone is really scary to read in these times because of people of color and how they feel when they see actual police. The sheer terror of, if the memory police were coming for you, was very sort of visceral in the book. And again, yes, another sort of scary parallel. Physical manifestation, Izzy says, physical manifestation of a lack of bodily autonomy due to the government. Absolutely, that's a sort of a particular phrasing that I hadn't thought of. I like that a lot. No hope, says Liz. Very happy with the ending. How it wasn't what I was expecting. Agreed. Same here. If it's not that, Lars says, they're just going to be angry with losing their leg. The novelist was happy in comparison to other disappearances. She said she was glad she didn't have to go through the hassle of burning. Yes, absolutely. Sad, but not expecting that. The affair or a glimmer of hope. Agreed, Liz, especially when I was resigned to the fact that he was just never going to leave that house. Then I was slightly happy about the affair, because it's not like the narrator was going to date and find somebody that she would eventually bring to her house where she has a man sort of hiding in a secret room. That's not something that you can trust somebody with, even though at some point when the old man's house is destroyed, he lives temporarily with the narrator, but he's also in on that in terms of hiding R. His wife was still waiting for him with his newborn. Agreed, Liz. That was definitely the other side of that, which is scary. Totoro, going back to the names, do you think someone would have lost their name is to say they had a name, Rose, or oh, interesting. Oh, that's clever. What if what if the name was the a name of an object that had been lost? What if somebody's first name was Rose or something similar like that, and then that was disappeared? That's an interesting thought. Maybe people did lose pieces of themselves based on um, objects that had disappeared. That's a good thought. All right, I'm going to get into a few things, a few things that I initially wanted to be changed. Let me know if you had any as well. Please feel free to add something in terms of stuff that you kind of wish had been different. Everything that I wish had been different, I'm also like it took me a second, but I was glad that it was the way that it was. Um, I wanted, as we kind of discussed, I wanted the mysteries of why this happens, how it happens to be revealed. I want to know if the memory police know what's going to disappear next, if they decide, if they wake up in the morning and are also confused about what's happening, and how, like, the logistics of everything, how it's skipping over them, how they're able to walk when everyone else doesn't know they have a left leg. But again, that's completely not the point of the book, and it wouldn't have necessarily provided any answers that would have been satisfactory to me, I guess. Like if they had some sort, I mean, what would the answer have been? They had some sort of machine that did that, or biological warfare. I mean, I have no concept of an answer that would have worked for me. So I'm sort of glad they didn't approach it. Same thing as I mentioned earlier with how the memory police was just an unknowable force. Nobody had a cousin who was part of the memory police. Like there was no human face to it. At one point, when she goes to the memory police to try to bring some food to the old man because he's being held there for questioning about the boat escape. I mean, she talks to a couple memory police officers there, but there's still no humanizing factor. They're a wall. They're impenetrable. And part of me wanted that for the sake of the parallels in our modern culture to be penetrable so that somebody could break in and start causing some trouble, as opposed to it just being a wall that takes over the entire island. So that was something that I wanted. But again, that kind of also gets to um, again my American desires for how I want fiction to be. So I wanted the narrator or the characters, some group of them, I wanted them to fight back. And the fact that they didn't is very unsettling. Earlier today, I came across a review of this book on NPR, which said if the memory police were an American novel, it might yield a contrarian hero determined to fight off the tyranny of the police. And that about sums it up. That's why I say I mean, that's where I kind of got that line of this being a very American type of desire. But that is absolutely what I felt. I thought from the time I picked this book up, I thought that she was going to somehow fight in terms of infiltration or manipulation, or through her novels that her work would get out and people would read it and retrieve their memories or something. And that not happening, but and also like there not even being a glimmer or a possibility of that happening was a real bummer, because they're not necessarily indifferent, but they are incredibly passive and accepting of this. The consensus is there's nothing to be done. And this doesn't bode well messaging wise for me in terms of long term hope, because when you think about things like climate change, like a impending disaster that we have slowly become accustomed to a point where a lot of people aren't, it's getting to the point where people just accept it as an inevitability, and it's just, hey, it's going to happen, we'll do what we have to or do what we can, is a terrifying prospect. That's certainly not like the lesson. There's nothing so concrete as like any sort of moralizing from the author. She's not laying out a blueprint of what to do and how to do it. I hope it's a cautionary tale in terms of not getting too used to the things that we're losing. So that's really uncomfortable to acknowledge. I wanted them to fight back because I want to think that we can fight back. And I wanted the memory police to show some weaknesses because I want to think that the things that we need to overcome have some weaknesses. So that's a big part. I've got a lot more to say on that, but I'm going to check the chat real quick. Let's see. After losing limbs, the memory police is still able to walk. It made me wonder if they all had the genetic malfunction of not being able to forget. Oh, that would be weird, especially in terms of like how the memory police was trying to recruit the professor. Like maybe they want the people who don't forget to be part of the sort of to be part of the memory police. That is a really interesting idea, Lars. I like that. Even though it's just a theory, what do you think of this detail? I mean, so that gets to the part like just how they were going to try to pay off the professor. I mean, that's an interesting way to, which is certainly a tactic used by fascists, is to make the people that you're oppressing an offer they can't refuse of like you're either with us or against us. Join the memory police, or you need to be on the run for the rest of your life. Um, is sort of an interesting way to keep growing their numbers to hold everyone else in the community down, while ensuring that they're able to keep continuing their mission. I really like that idea. Um, I was thinking that as well. I was thinking about how they're chosen, but also decided to give up on that thought because it's just a book, and I went with it. I was thinking about. Sorry, I'm distracted by a stranger in the alley doing weird things. That's what I need to look back at the chat. Decided to give up on that because it's just the book and I went with it. That's kind of where I was, Liz, but I really like Lars's theory there. The book was very as is and also thought provoking at the same time. Love the dynamic. Like the book. I liked it as well. Um, and agreed. It was slower and more thought provoking than I initially wanted when I picked it up, but I'm happy with the book as a whole for sure. A lot of people have compared it to 1984, Alec. I'm not sure if it says. I'm not sure if that's on the back. I thought it was somewhere. I've definitely seen lots of comparisons to Orwell. Wait, here it is. And a haunting Orwellian novel. Um, Absolutely, I think it belongs in that sort of same genre. Although there's a lot to it that's more like the like magical realism. A lot of Latin American authors, Gabriel Garcia Marquez in particular, is known for a sort of magical realism where it's like again everything is sort of normal life except for sort of magical aspects that sort of kind of weave through society in some ways. So it's kind of a cross between that and something that like Orwell would write. The HQ, why wasn't there more violence when she went? It seemed very subtle. Agreed, they were very scary, but okay. Oh, that's where Izzy said yes, you don't really get any payoff from her visiting the memory police. Um, yeah, agreed. That was just in terms of payoff. Like you wanted there to be violence, or there wanted to be some sort of whether they tried to abduct her or she had to run away or something. Like you wanted there to be more action in that respect. But again, it's just like it was bureaucratic more than anything. It was just a bunch of faceless officers in their uniforms who there was no single person that you could pick out from that. um Lars agrees, especially in the beginning. After a while the perspective changes and you aren't focusing on the same things as 1984 for sure. Alec, I do need some moderators. How do I get rid of this person? Let me see. Put user in timeout. That's a good start. Hide user. User's message will be hidden. Cool. All right, that was easy enough. I was more concerned about that in my first live stream. I didn't expect that to happen. Um, a little bit back to how I wanted there to be. I have maybe another half page on this in terms of how I wanted them to fight them off. Um, just in terms of things that we're losing as well. I read some review that brought this up really well. I thought like animals becoming extinct in terms of what our parallels would be. Animals becoming extinct. A couple of different island nations that are drowning from climate change. Languages that are being lost due to like an increased sort of global economy and smaller nations sort of being deliberately forced to abandon their traditions and languages for the sake of a more widespread type of commerce. Um, The connection to police surveillance, how we're living under it now. I know a lot of people are saying not to take pictures or at least post them of protesters because the police are using them against people, which is obviously terrifying to think of. Like how the FBI found that one person who I think was like throwing something at the cops at one of the um, protests, who was identified from some fraction of a tattoo because of a photo that was taken. So the parallel of living under police surveillance presently was also a little scary. It's also frightening how they don't just descend into pure misery all the time, that they are slowly accustomed to it. They aren't afraid. Things just sort of carry on. The novelist loses novels and everything that meant to her, and she just becomes a typist, and it doesn't bother her because not only does she forget that she used to write, she forgot the process of forgetting. So these things mean nothing to her for a long stretch until eventually finally she does sort of have R jog that back into her memory, and for seconds at a time, if she starts by just writing a single sentence every night to work on her book. um, so it's again provided a small sense of hope when she finished the book. Maybe she's turning around, maybe she's going to be able to fight this, but then eventually she doesn't and just loses her entire body. One thing that somebody mentioned that I just came across a quote I meant to put somewhere else in the outline, but uh, again, just in terms of modern parallels, on page 65 there was a line that said, if on occasion a whole household suddenly went missing with no warning at all, the neighbors would simply pass their house with a furtive glance at the windows, hoping that the former inhabitants were safe somewhere. The citizens of the island were by now quite accustomed to these losses. So, again, how depressing it is in terms of parallels to everyday life, where, oh, something bad is happening to that group or to that person, but bad stuff has been happening all the time. So it's just something that we grow accustomed to. Um, the only type of hope within their past, their being, sort of passive and um, inactive in terms of fighting the memory police, was the only good thing is that they take care of each other. They throw a birthday party for the old man, they cook pancakes, and all the while everything that makes them who they are is being stripped away, and they're powerless, but they do still have a sense of community in terms of taking care of each other, at least in small pockets. You're also still worried that somebody is going to turn you into the memory police. It's not like they could show all of the objects that they had collected or that R had held on to. They can't, they're not such a good community that they can protect each other like that, but still friends and family members helping each other through these things was the only bright spot. But at the same time, that's not, in terms of a larger lesson overall, it's still pretty terrifying. Like, yeah, my family and I are going to do our best to support each other while everything is burning around us, isn't necessarily the mood that I thought I was going to take away from this book. What else do we see? Just a side note, but when will the next book be announced for the book club? I am not sure. I'm looking at a couple over here that I think would probably make pretty good candidates. Um, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm still thinking about even if I'm going to do it. So I don't know. But if you guys are enjoying it, and I think you are, I've got 19 people hanging out right now. That's pretty cool. So yeah, maybe I will. I also missed the big action scene in HQ. After the visit is over, it feels more grounded in reality that the novelist just faces a faceless sort of corporation. Yeah, I like that, Lars. That did feel, yes, you were expecting there to be some big blow up, but then when they um but then sorry, there's pigeons outside my window that are incredibly loud. But yeah, then when she just sort of walks away and it was just a bureaucratic nightmare, not necessarily a threat, that again makes it even more scary. And that it's not like, not an enemy you can point to. It's not a traditional antagonist, right? Like there's even though they as a force are taking over the island, it's not like you can point to a person and say that's the bad guy and that's how we're going to defeat him. That's not at all how that's not at all how it worked. It was more of an environment overall. And so yeah, when she doesn't get that confrontation that we're sort of looking for, when they just ask her a few questions and turn her away, then that both sort of deflates us a little bit. There wasn't a big action sequence, but at the same time, maybe that's a little bit scarier in that it's like the bureaucracy and drudgery sort of um, taking things over in a very official, non-confrontational way is maybe sort of how these people were manipulated into this to begin with. Yes, made it even scarier. One thing in frightening than a huge action scene would be bureaucracy. Um, timeout for James. Sorry, not contributing. Put user in timeout. All right. Oh, it's only for 300 seconds. Sorry, James. It's been fun. Hide user. All right. Any other thoughts? Anything you guys want to say? Sorry, Liz, for this. I don't know what else to do with it. Thanks for coming. I don't know what my next book will be. Feel free to throw in any other comments. But that's about all I've got. I hope you liked it. If you do enjoy this, and it seems like several of you are back, then maybe I will do another one. No hard plans at this point. Looking at several over here that I would like to read. But man, just about at the hour mark again. Not anticipating it, but I'm glad you were here for it. So thanks for being here. If you have any suggestions, add them to the comments once this video is posted based on the last experience that was last posted. The last one kind of took overnight to load and then it was up the next day. So if you have anything you want to add to the conversation, please do it in the comments in the video. Liz, I miss you too. I'll come back to the shop at some point. Totoro, do I have any suggestions? One that I'm looking at, I'm not sure if I'll do for the next book club, but one that I've been looking at for a while is called The Overstory. I only hear great things about it. I've heard it recommended to me by several people. I've only been reluctant to make it a book club selection officially because all I know about it is that it's about trees. But I hear it's wonderful. So I don't know about anything about any characters. All the back covers and reviews just say things about trees, but it's supposed to be really, really great. So that might be the next one. All right. Thank you for being here, Izzy. Thank you, Liz and Totoro and Wars. It's been a lot of fun. Sorry. And now there's more people. I was just going to wrap it up when there were 14. Now there's 17 people here. Butterfly Garden, that would be an amazing conversation. I'll check it out, Liz. All right. That's it. It feels weird to close it out when there's 17 people still here. But thanks for watching. I'll maybe do another one. Give me some suggestions. And thanks. Have a good one. May July be better than June. See ya.